Hello, welcome to our webinar today on Southwest Minnesota Arts Council's Arts in the Schools grants for our fiscal year 2023, which runs from July 1st, 2022 through June 30th, 2023. I am Carolyn Koska, the Grants Administrator here at Southwest Minnesota Arts Council. And first, we'll just run through what we're going to talk about today. We'll talk briefly about Southwest Minnesota Arts Council. We'll look at the guidelines for this grant program. We'll go over to our website and see what resources are available for you there. We'll go into our grant system and walk through the application, and we'll finish up talking about the grant process or what happens after you submit your application. And we'll save some time at the end if you'd like to talk more about your specific projects. Southwest Minnesota Arts Council, or SMOC, is a nonprofit organization committed to promoting and encouraging the development of the arts in the 18 counties of Southwest Minnesota by serving as a source of funds and technical services which enable local organizations, educational institutions, and individuals to sponsor, create, and promote the arts in their communities. So here's our region down in the southwest corner of the state. We are one of 11 regional arts councils that cover the whole state of Minnesota and work to get our state arts funding out into all corners of the state. So yes, our funding comes mostly from the state of Minnesota. We have an allocation from their general fund, but also the majority comes from the Arts and Cultural Heritage or Legacy Fund. We also receive some funding from the McKnight Foundation that we use for some of our grants for artists and from memberships and donations from around our region. So your school needs to be located within our service region in order to apply. And those counties, those 18 counties include Big Stone, Chippewa, Cottonwood, Jackson, Candy, Ojai, Lac of Parle, Lincoln, Lyon, McLeod, Meeker, Murray, Nobles, Pipestone, Redwood, Renville, Rock, Swift, and Yellow Medicine, and also tribal lands within that area. We acknowledge that this region occupies the traditional, ancestral, and contemporary lands of the Dakota people. So our Arts in the Schools grants are open to public schools and community education for school-related projects. If you are one of these types of organizations and you have a community-related project, you can apply under our art project grants instead. So there are a variety of activities that you can do with this grant. In the past, we had you choose from a few different specific project types, but this year we have opened it up a lot more. But these that we have listed here are the most common and expected things that we see coming through our requests. Artist residencies, where you're bringing an artist into the school to work with students for maybe a week. A juried student art exhibit, where your students are showing their art and you can bring in an artist to give them some feedback, or an arts field trip where you are traveling to an art gallery or museum or some type of arts performance. So your project may be something else besides these, but these, like I said, are the most common ones that we see. Some other things to be aware of that we'd like to see with these projects. They can happen during the school year or during the summer, but they do have to be school-related projects. They also need to be open to all of the students within a grade or a subject area or activity. So the project could be for all fifth graders, for all band students, etc. We also would like you to have some little piece of community involvement, a way for the students to share what they've been doing with the community. In the past, when we did have those different categories that you needed to choose from, we had different grant amounts for those, but now we have everything just all under the one maximum request amount of $4,000. And no matching funds are required, which means that as long as your project costs less than the amount you can request, your school is not required to put up any funding towards the activity. Some things to be aware of that are not eligible for these grants. We can't fund requests from parochial schools since we are using those state funds. We can't fund the payment of school personnel unless you need a substitute teacher while you are participating in the project. Your activities can't be substitutions for regular school programs. Our state funding has a rule that says the grants need to supplement rather than supplant funding for what's going on with your school. We also can't fund supplies outside of those needed for the project. So we can't do general classroom supplies or equipment. We also can't fund projects that don't have an art focus, activities that take place outside of Minnesota. Again, because we're using state funds, they want that money to stay within the state. That does mean that field trips to Sioux Falls, for instance, are out. We can't fund activities for the religious socialization of the participants or audience. We can't fund fundraising events. In other words, we need the grant money to help your project break even, not to make a profit. We can't fund payments of debts that are incurred before the grant begins. You can't use these grant funds to match another grant from us. And you are not eligible to apply if you still have a late final report out there. So it's a good idea to also check through the guidelines for this grant program just to make sure you're not missing anything. And we will take a look at where you can find those a little later on here. We have 2 rounds for this grant program this year. The first round has a deadline of October 5th, and the earliest you could start anything moving forward towards your project is December 1st. Then our second round deadline is January 25th for projects starting March 1st or later. And on these deadline dates, you need to submit your application by 4:30 p.m. It's helpful to see which round works the best for your project. This October round works really well for projects in the second half of the year. And then the January round, you can do something kind of at the end of the school year or into the fall of the next year. So when you are choosing a start date for your project, check for that earliest allowed start date because you can't start any project activities before that date or spend any funds. That means that your start date shouldn't be the first day of your residency or the day of your field trip because you'll need time to make some of those purchases and arrangements beforehand. So if you need to book your theater tickets or put down a deposit for an artist that's coming to your school. Those have to happen on or after the start date. You'll also need an end date for your project, and it's good to give yourself plenty of time to wrap up the project and also think about any extra time you might need to evaluate it. And grants that are awarded in fiscal year 23 this year need to be finished up by June 30th of 2024. There are 2 people that you'll need to have connected to your application, a project director, and this is usually a classroom teacher perhaps who is running the project, and then an authorizing official, which would be your principal or superintendent or someone else who has authorizing power for your school. These 2 cannot be the same person. You do need 2 different people, and both will need to sign off on everything related to the grant, including this application. And we'll just stop here for a second if there are any questions so far. Not hearing any questions, we will move on and head over to our website. I'm just going to point out on the home page here, the fastest place to get to our grant system. If you scroll down beneath these slides here, there's this black grants box with a login button. So that's a quick way to just get back into that system. We're going to take a little detour and take a look at this workshops and assistance page. This is a place just to remind yourself of all of the opportunities that are available for you to get some help with your application. We have a series of Q&A sessions. The next one of those is coming up on September 12th. That is online. You can schedule some time to meet with me by phone or Zoom or in person. I'll also add that our grant support open office hours will be starting up again in September. So that will be the second Tuesday of the month from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. You can come stop in our office, get any questions answered. You can even sit and work on your application while we are nearby to answer any questions. And then here's just a list again of all of our online grant workshops that we've been having. These ones that have happened already, you'll see there's the video recording of the webinar there. And then for the ones upcoming yet, registration. So you can check back here for a video of today's webinar. That should be ready in about a week. We will head over to our schools. And before we dive into what we have for you here for the Arts in the Schools grant, we want to take a look at this Compass roster of artists. So Compass is an organization out of the Twin Cities that maintains a roster of teaching artists. So if you are looking for someone to come into your school and work with your students, this is a great place to kind of see what's out there and connect with some of those artists. So we're going to take a look at their kind of list of people here. And you could say, maybe we're interested in literary arts. So here's a whole bunch of artists who teach in that area. We'll take a look at one here. So there's some information about their background, and then they've got some programming that they can do listed here for you. And these little icons, if you check, those kind of refer to the age group. So you can choose something that's appropriate for your particular students. So if you decide that they are an artist that might work well for your school, you can contact them right through this site. Back to our Arts in the Schools grant. So on this page, we've got some materials related to that. We have the guidelines here, so make sure to read through those. We have the application questions, which are in a Word document. Some people prefer to write their draft in that and then paste everything into the grant system later. We have our budget form. There are the scoring criteria that the review panel will be using to score your application. That can be helpful to take a look at that. And then we have the final report questions, which let you take a look at what you might be getting into there. Then we have important dates related to the rounds for this grant program. There's a deadline by which to request staff draft review. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. The actual application deadline, the date that the panel will be reviewing everything, the date that the board will be making those final funding decisions, and then that earliest project start date. Then we just have some information about some alternative ways to apply and a video tutorial for the grant system. And here up at the top, this Apply Now button is another place that will take you to log into the grant system. So we're going to do that. So if you already have an account in the system, you would just log in here. If you are totally new, you would create a new account. And if you're not sure if you or someone else from your school already has an account in the system, you can just check with us and we can get that figured out for you. So I'm going to go ahead and log in here. All right, so you'll come into your dashboard, and I'll just point out if you also are a review panelist for us, you'll find that it goes to your panelist dashboard first. So you'll want to switch to your applicant dashboard. So this is where you would come when you log in. Unless you are in here for the very first time, then you'll be taken straight to this apply page. And this lists all of the grants that we have open right now. So you'll scroll through. Here's our Arts in the Schools. If you'd like to just take a look at the application without actually starting anything, there's a preview button here. Otherwise, if you're ready to go, we can hit apply here. All right, so here's our application, and I'll just point out a few buttons at the top here. We have Google Translate embedded into the site, so if you need to work in a different language, you can choose that here, and it will translate the interface and questions into that language for you. We have the Copy Previous Answers button. If you have done an application in the system before, it can copy answers over from that to this new application. So that can be really helpful if you are if you have a recurring project that you do every year. And then we have the Collaborate button. This allows you to invite someone else to work on the application with you. So you just enter their email address here, choose the level of permission you want to give them, and put a little message here as to what it is that you want them to do. Maybe you want a colleague to just proof the application. Maybe you're having your artist come in here and enter some of their information about themselves directly. So you would just fill this out and click invite. The person will get an email and we'll just need to create a password to come in here and work. Then we have at the top here just some reminders of ways to get help while you're working on your application. You can schedule some time with me or email questions directly to me here. Then we start with your project name. So just something descriptive of what you're going to be doing. There's some examples here. Then you'd enter the amount you're going to request. You'll probably want to wait until you fill out your budget form to enter in that number. We have links to our guidelines and criteria again here. And then just some tips for you as you're writing. I'll just point out that a lot of the fields have a pretty large character limit, and we're not expecting you to necessarily fill that up depending on what question you are answering. We want to make sure that you have plenty of space in case you have a lot to say about something, but maybe a couple sentences are enough for some of the questions. So you'll start out describing your project. What is it that you are wanting to do? Then we also ask you to spell out which students are participating, whether they're in a particular grade level or class or school building. We'd like some details of when this is all happening, dates for that, if you hopefully have a daily schedule of what's going to be going on. Then if there are participation fees involved, how will this be made accessible to all students? And then you can talk about the community component that you have for your project. Here's where you can enter your project start and end date. Then we come to the budget. You have the option to use our Excel form here, or you can create your own budget. We're going to take a look at the Excel form. So here's that form. Can enter your school name or project name up here, and then start listing costs that you might have. And we'll put in some numbers here. And you'll see that is adding up for you. And maybe we have a little bit of money set aside for this project that you can use. And then this section helps you just double check how much you're requesting. So this takes your total cost minus your total other funding, and tells us your request cannot exceed $24.50 or the maximum request amount for this grant program, whichever is less. So we'll find our arts in the schools here, 4,000, and our 24.50 is less than 4,000. So that's what we can ask for. But let's say our project is a little more expensive. And now it tells us your request cannot exceed 51.50 or our 4,000. So here our 4,000 is less. That's how much we can request. But down here is another double check of your profit, which needs to equal 0. And so right now we are short 1150. So that will need to be found somewhere and added into your other funding. And then you'll see our profit equals 0 now. So you fill this out and save it, and then you can upload it here into the application. We have the budget narrative field, which just gives you some space if you have some more details you'd like to get into that didn't fit into the budget form. If you're going into some detail about costs of supplies that you need, and sort of show how those are multiplied by your number of students, etc. This next section is all about the artists or the arts institutions that are going to be involved in your project. So you will describe those artists, performers, institutions, and why did you end up choosing those particular options. If you are working specifically with some artists, you can, they'll need to upload their resumes here. We'll also need a sample lesson plan from them. And this does not necessarily have to be the lesson plan for the residency that they're going to be doing for you. It can be a sample of something that they've done in the past. That's kind of up to what the artist would like to provide. So this section of artist resumes and sample lesson plan is just for if you are working directly with an artist versus an arts institution or something. You can provide some work samples from that artist or organization here. You can upload some things if you have some images, for instance, or you can provide some links if you wanted to link to the art museum that you are going to. Next, we're having you think about impact of this project. And we are checking with you here. We talked about this a little bit before. How is this project supplementing your programs rather than substituting for your regular arts programming? And then we ask you to think about some specific impacts this might have on your students. And this might be changes to their artistic skills, knowledge, attitudes, or behaviors. Then we ask, how do you plan to measure or prove that those changes have taken place? And talk about how you're going to gather any results or feedback. It can be very helpful to do a kind of pre and post measure of where students are at with their skills or interest in this particular art form. If you are using a survey of some sort, you can attach that here as your evaluation tool. Then we have some audience numbers, and then the number of hours of student artist contact time. This would be if you just pick one of your students and add up how much time that one student would be spending interacting with the artist or the place that you're visiting, performance, etc. So how many hours would that one student be participating in this activity? Then we're just gathering some data here. We ask about your most recently completed year, and for that year, some audience numbers of those who participated in arts activities that were not part of the regular curriculum, and then expenses for those arts activities. These can definitely be estimates. It's fine if some of these answers are zero. This doesn't have any bearing on your application, just some data that we need to collect. Then we come to some contact information. So here's where you'd put that in for your project director, your authorizing official, and then we just ask about the grant writer in case we need to ask some questions. And then we've got our electronic signatures at the bottom here. And this is another great place to use the collaborate button if you want to invite your principal to come in here and sign as authorizing official. All right, so down at the bottom, we've got our couple buttons here for saving, submitting when you're ready. We're going to click the Save Application button. The system will be auto-saving as you're working, but if you click that button, it'll give you a list of all of the required questions that you still need to answer. And here, since we haven't done anything, they're all listed, but that can kind of help you track your progress. And if you wanted to continue working, you would just hit continue there, but we're going to go back to the dashboard. And we'll see right here now is our application that we just started. So if you need to go back in and keep working, you can click Edit Application here. And then this is the same place you'd come back to if you're awarded a grant to access your and fill out your contract and your final report. And we will head back over to our slides for a minute and pause if there are any questions. All right, we will keep moving on here. Just some tips as you are working on your application. It helps to think ahead to choose what really is the best application round for your project. Sometimes you may be needing to think ahead. For instance, if you're wanting to do something that happens in the fall, you have to be kind of thinking about that in January already. So just make sure you check that to know how early you need to apply for your grant for that project. Make sure to read the guidelines and criteria very carefully. We don't want you to write your entire application and then discover that there was some eligibility problem. It's also good to start actually working on your application early. You may be waiting on the artist to get you some information. You may run into questions that you need to take time and get answered. Maybe it takes a while to get your principal signed in to sign off on the application. So give yourself more time than you think you might need. Also, you have seen that a lot of the questions in the application had a bunch of bullet points under them. So make sure you're reading through all of those and that you touch on each of those in your answer. We already kind of talked about there's no need to try to pad out your answers to fill up more of the text box. Just keep things nice and clear and concise as long as you're answering all of those parts of the question. And you don't need to use any particular grant language. Just writing in everyday language is fine. It's also good to assume that the grant reviewers don't know anything about your school or your project. Maybe you have a recurring residency that you do every year, but we are pulling our panelists from around the whole region, so it is likely that they have no idea that you've been doing that. So it's good to have somebody who's not familiar with what it is you're going to be doing to read through. And finally, don't hesitate to contact us. We are here to help you, so please take advantage of that. So some of those ways you can get help, you can contact us to just talk through your project before you're even getting started, make sure everything is eligible. As I mentioned before, as you run into questions in the application, you can contact us and we can help you through those. And then we can actually review a draft of your application for you before you submit it. So if you let us know up to about 2 weeks before the deadline that you have a draft ready, we can go in and take a look and let you know if you're missing anything or if there's something that we think might be confusing to the reviewers that needs a little more information, things like that. That can be really helpful. So there is that deadline to request the draft to review. You can ask as it gets closer to the deadline, but we can't guarantee that we're able to take a look unless it is nice and early before the application deadline. So what happens after you submit your application? The first thing is that we as staff review your application for eligibility and completeness. So if we see anything missing, any issues with your eligibility, we'll contact you and you'll have 48 hours to remedy that. And then that is our kind of last contact with your application. Staff do not decide who gets funded or not. We're just here as your advocates. So the whole round's worth of applications will go on to a panel of individuals from around our region, and they will discuss and score the applications based on the criteria, which we'll look at in a minute. And then their scores and recommendations go on to our board of directors who make the final funding decisions. So the arts in the schools scoring criteria include the artistic quality and merit of the project. That is worth 53% of your score. So very important to provide evidence of the artist's experience and work or information about the institution that you're going to. Then we have the impact on the participants and audience, which would mostly be impact on your students and a small amount of your community impact. That is worth 32% of your score. And then finally, the feasibility of the project worth 15%. And that would be things just looking, does this seem well planned? Does your budget make sense for what you're doing? Does your timeline make sense, etc.? So if you open up that link to the scoring criteria that I pointed out in a couple of different places earlier here, you'll see that there is some more information under each of these criteria. So that's important to take a look at and go into more detail there. You also have an opportunity to earn a couple extra points in your score. This happens after the panel has scored, but before things go to our board. So you can earn one additional percentage point for each of these following that you meet if you are a first-time applicant to us, if your organization is led by or primarily serving BIPOC or LGBTQ communities or people with disabilities, or if you are in a county that has received not so much funding from us in the last year. If your grant is awarded, you'll need to fill out a contract. And then this is another change for us this year. We used to pay out 80% of the grant award at the beginning of the project, and then the remaining 20% after you had finished your project and your final report. But starting this year, we are paying out the grants in full at the beginning of the project. So once we've received your contract, then you will be sent that full payment. You'll need to acknowledge the funding on any marketing that you might do. There'll be a credit line in your grant contract that you'll need to use. You may also need to use this Minnesota Legacy logo depending on the source of the funds that you were awarded. But all of these materials will be sent to you, so there shouldn't be any guessing over what you need to do with this and where to find that information. If you are in the middle of your project and suddenly something changes, which we know happens, please contact us and we can help you figure out how to deal with those changes. It might be things like extending your project date, approving some changes to your budget, if something is suddenly no longer available, what's something else you could purchase that would be similar in the spirit of what you were originally requesting. So no need to worry if things start going a different way with your project, but please just contact us so we can approve any changes you need to make. You'll need to fill out a final report, and that is due 60 days after your project end date. So you have plenty of time to work on that. And it's a good idea as you're just getting started on your project to take a look at that report just to see what kinds of information you'll need, what things to pay attention to during your project. So that was it for our Arts in the Schools grants, but I just wanted to point out another opportunity that may be of interest to you. We have our art study opportunity for youth grants, and these are small grants for $500 for students in grades 5 through 12 to do some sort of special study. They may be going to some sort of music camp or mentoring with a local artist, something like that. So our application deadline for that is March 29th, sort of preparing for activities that may take place over the summer. And we'll be having a webinar on February 9th that will go into more detail about this program. So I just wanted to make you aware of that in case you have students that might be interested in this. Then I just wanted to point out, we have moved to a new office. We are now at 509 West Main Street in Marshall, and our hours are also slightly adjusted. Our core hours that we will be open are 9 to noon and 1 to 4. We may be in the office kind of on either end of that, but if you're planning on stopping by during those times, just give us a call and check to make sure that someone is here. So feel free to contact us in any of these ways. And that is it for our presentation today. So thanks for joining us, and we hope to hear from you.